The rain outside hammered against the diner's windows, and the city buzzed with the usual rush of people. In the midst of it all, a homeless man sat on the curb, his clothes ragged and his face weathered with years of hardship. He held a crumpled dollar in his hand, the last of his money, his only possession. He stared at it for a long moment, his mind clouded with thoughts of whether he should buy bread to fill his empty stomach or save it for another day. Across the street, in a small, dimly lit diner, a man in worn, simple clothes sat alone at a booth, staring at the menu in front of him. But his gaze wasn't on the food. It was far away, lost in thought, filled with despair. He had no appetite for food, only for escape, for a way out of his life that had spiraled into nothingness. The weight of his troubles hung heavily over him. He needed to catch the last train out of the city, but he didn't have enough for a ticket. He had no money left. The homeless man watched the stranger from across the street. There was something about him. He seemed out of place, troubled. The way he slumped in the booth, absent-mindedly staring at the menu, struck a chord with the homeless man. He had been there once, stuck in despair, unsure of what to do next. Without thinking much, the homeless man stood up and slowly crossed the street, his footsteps heavy but purposeful. He wasn't sure why, but something told him he had to go to that man. Maybe it was because he knew the kind of emptiness that man felt. The man in the booth didn't notice the homeless man as he approached. He continued to stare at the menu, his thoughts far away. "Excuse me," the homeless man's voice broke the silence. The man looked up, startled. He hadn't expected anyone to speak to him. "Yeah," the man responded, his voice tinged with weariness. "I saw you sitting here," the homeless man continued, his eyes kind but tired. "You don't look like you're in a good place, man. Something wrong?" The man sighed deeply, a troubled look crossing his face. "I need to catch the last train," he said, his voice low. "But I don't have the money for a ticket. I'm stuck here. I don't know what to do." The homeless man nodded slowly, his eyes softening with understanding. He knew what it was like to feel lost, to feel like the world had turned its back on you. "It's tough, I get it," he said. "I've been there." The man looked at him, confused. "You've been where? How do you know?" The homeless man gave a faint smile, his hands shaking slightly. "You know, life doesn't always go the way we plan. We all end up here at some point. It doesn't matter if we have money or not. We're all just trying to find our way." The man stared at him, unsure of what to say. His desperation was clear, but something in the homeless man's words made him pause. The homeless man looked down at the crumpled dollar in his hand. His last dollar, the one thing he had left. He could feel the weight of it, but at that moment he didn't care. He slid it across the table. "Here," the homeless man said quietly. "Take it. You need it more than I do." The man stared at the dollar in disbelief. "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I can't. You need it. I can't take your last dollar." The homeless man shook his head, a quiet smile on his face. "I don't need it. I've been through too much to care about that. But you need to get to that train. Life's a little easier when we help each other out. Just take it." The man hesitated, his hand hovering over the dollar. He felt a mix of guilt and gratitude, but there was something in the homeless man's eyes, a calmness and understanding that made him reach out and take the dollar. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The homeless man nodded, his expression peaceful. Sometimes all we need is a little help to get where we're going. As the man looked down at the dollar in his hand, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just the money, it was the kindness. It was the simple reminder that even in the hardest of times, people could still care for one another. The homeless man stood up slowly, nodding once more at the man before turning and walking out into the storm. The man watched him go, the weight of the moment settling in. He stood up, a small spark of hope igniting in him. Maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a way out. The homeless man turned to walk away. He had done what he could, given his last dollar without a second thought. It was all he had, and yet in that moment it felt like the right thing to do. He didn't expect anything in return, nor did he want anything. Just as he was about to push open the diner door to step out into the storm, the voice of the man he had helped called out. "Wait!" the man shouted, rushing after him, still holding the dollar in his hand. The homeless man stopped but didn't turn around, waiting for him to catch up. I can't just take this from you," the man said, a mix of confusion and gratitude in his voice. "It's your last dollar. I can't accept it. Where can I find you to give it back? I can't just keep it." The homeless man turned slowly, looking at the man for a moment. He could see the genuine struggle in his eyes, the same kind of lost look he had seen in the mirror many times before. But the homeless man wasn't worried about the dollar anymore. "Listen," the homeless man said calmly, shaking his head. "It's not about the money. I gave it to you because you needed it, and right now that's all that matters. Don't worry about giving it back. You can do more by helping someone else when the time comes." The man stood still for a moment, unsure of what to say. His hand still gripped the dollar as if holding onto it would change everything. "Please," the man continued, his voice quieter now. "I want to help you. If you ever need anything, if you want the dollar back, or if you just need someone to talk to, where can I find you?" The homeless man hesitated for a moment, looking at the man's face. He wasn't sure why, but he felt a certain connection with this stranger. Maybe it was the rawness in his eyes, maybe it was the feeling of being understood. "Well," the homeless man said after a pause, "I usually sleep under the bridge near Elm Street, right by the old broken-down bus station. You won't miss it." The man's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Elm Street, by the bus station. I'll remember." The homeless man gave him a small, knowing smile. "Good. But remember this, don't worry about me. Just make sure you help someone when you can. That's all I ask." The man stood silent for a moment, then said softly, "Thank you. Really, thank you." The homeless man nodded and turned to leave, disappearing into the rain. The man stood there, still holding the crumpled dollar in his hand, feeling something change inside him. He had come to the diner looking for something, a way out maybe, or just a moment of peace. What he hadn't expected was to find it in the kindness of a stranger. As the homeless man walked away, he couldn't help but wonder if their paths would cross again. Would he be able to help the man in some way, as the man had helped him? The thought lingered in his mind as he turned back toward the diner, his heart just a little lighter than before. This version has the homeless man telling the man where he sleeps under the bridge by Elm Street, and it leaves the door open for a potential future meeting. The dialogue emphasizes their connection, but the homeless man remains focused on the act of kindness and the importance of helping others when they can. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. The homeless man sat in his usual spot on the street corner, the cold biting through his thin jacket as he stared into the darkness. He had grown used to the streets, to the life that had become his. He had no dreams left, just survival. The world had long forgotten him, just as he had long since stopped expecting anything from anyone. But tonight, something was different. The quiet was interrupted by the soft hum of an approaching car. The sound grew louder, drawing his attention. He looked up and his eyes widened. A sleek black car with tinted windows and guards standing at the ready pulled up beside him. The sound of the engine was almost a whisper compared to the pounding of his heart. A man stepped out, his polished shoes hitting the pavement with a distinct rhythm. He wore a sharp suit, and his demeanor was entirely different from the man he had met months ago. This man looked confident, collected, and powerful, nothing like the defeated figure he had shared a conversation with on that fateful night. The homeless man stood up in disbelief, squinting at the figure before him. "Wait, are you—" The man turned toward him, a slow, almost knowing smile crossing his face. It was the same man, the one who had sat with him in despair, the one who had given up hope. "It's me," the man said calmly. The homeless man's voice shook. "But how? You were—" The man nodded slowly, cutting him off. I lost everything. Money, friends, my purpose. I was exactly where you are now, struggling, questioning everything. He paused, taking in a deep breath before continuing. But I rebuilt myself, slowly, step by step, until I was able to climb back. The homeless man blinked in disbelief. But how did you go from that to this? The man gave him a small, genuine smile. I had to hit rock bottom before I realized that I had the power to rise again. And I did. I had to learn the value of things, real things, like kindness. The homeless man was speechless, processing the weight of the words. You gave me something that night. You gave me your last dollar, something I knew you needed. And I realized then that there's still good in the world. People like you who don't ask for anything in return. That's why I'm here. The homeless man looked confused. What do you mean? Why come back now? Then with a slow smile, the billionaire said, To try to repay you. He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a set of keys, handing them over. This is a key to an apartment. It's yours now. No strings attached. It's a fresh start for you, one you deserve. The homeless man blinked in astonishment. But why? Because you've shown me what it truly means to give, the billionaire said softly. And I want to make sure you have the chance to live without fear, without hunger. You've earned that. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it over to the homeless man. I've been able to start over, and now I want to offer you something too. Here's my card. I can get you a job. You don't have to stay here any longer. The homeless man stared at the card, unsure of what to say. A job? But I'm not sure what to even... The man interrupted. You've already proven more than enough. He then pulled out a wad of cash and handed it to the homeless man. This is for you, not as charity, but as something you've earned. You've done more than I could ever ask for. The homeless man hesitated, his eyes tearing up. But why? Why me? The man's face softened. Because I owe you. You gave me hope when I had none. Now it's time for me to pay that forward. The homeless man's hand trembled as he took the money, staring down at the bill in his palm. The gesture seemed so simple yet so deeply meaningful. As he stood there, the billionaire, now fully restored, paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. I need to show you something. Give me a second. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the same crumpled dollar bill, the one the homeless man had given him months ago. He unfolded it gently, smoothing out the wrinkles, and handed it back to him. The homeless man's eyes widened, his chest tightening. Is this... The billionaire nodded slowly. It is. That dollar meant more to me than any amount of money I've made since. It's a reminder that sometimes the things we think are small, like giving your last dollar, are the things that hold the most power. He handed the dollar back with a quiet sincerity. Keep this. Don't spend it. It's worth more than anything you'll ever buy, and when you're ready, when you know it's time, you'll understand why. The homeless man stood frozen, looking down at the key, the card, the crumpled dollar, and the cash. His heart swelled with emotion, his mind struggling to grasp the reality of the moment. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. I never expected any of this. The billionaire smiled warmly. You didn't have to. Sometimes the universe gives back what you put into it. He turned, getting into the car, but before it drove off, he turned to the man one last time. Remember, what you do, the kindness you show, the help you offer, the love you give, it always comes back to you in ways you never expect. And with that, the car disappeared into the night, leaving the homeless man with a new future, a fresh beginning, and the undeniable truth that sometimes what you give to the world is what the world gives back to you. The universe, after all, always has a way of returning what you put out into it.